year, and a heavy snowfall surprising all of us before Halloween, our own preparations for Christmas this year have taken on a new urgency in Chicago. But the season of Advent is one of great and joyful anticipation, so we do our best. As this afternoon's speaker will remind us, all of human history prior to the incarnation and birth of Jesus Christ was a protracted advent of longing and preparation for the central event in human history. From the course of the heavenly bodies, which aligned with providential precision to lead the wise men from the east to the babe lying in the manger, to the exquisite fashioning in the Blessed Mother of a pristine body and soul to be the tabernacle of Him whom the entire universe could not contain. From the special election of a small and otherwise undistinguished people in the Middle East to the enlightenment of the Greeks, the Romans, and the other peoples, God attended to every detail. At each of the Masses during Advent, we are reminded that ours too is a time of longing and preparation. And no less than in Judea during the reign of King Herod, our Lord, in His own way and with perfect insight and knowledge, is preparing the church and each one of us for the second and final coming of Jesus Christ. If at times everything seems dark and hopeless, they no doubt felt that way at that time as well. It is not coincidental that Advent falls at the darkest time of the year, and that following the nativity of the light of the world, the very cosmos shifts to bring more and more light to each day. As G.K. Chesterton said in The Everlasting Man, all that was the best and the brightest of human endeavor was represented in the region of the Mediterranean at the time of Augustus. But man relying on his own resources could do no more. The time was needful of divine intervention. In fact, it was the fullness of time. Dr. Timothy O'Donnell is the third president of Christendom College in Front Royal, Virginia. As we know, Christendom is one of a handful of colleges ranked as authentically Catholic by the Newman Society. He received a licentiate and a doctorate in ascetical and mystical theology from the Angelicum in Rome. Having taught at a number of colleges, he continues to teach at Christendom with particular interest and expertise in the history of the Irish Church, ancient and biblical history, and devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. He is the recipient of a number of awards in recognition of his contributions to Catholic higher education. He and his wife Kathy, with whom we are pleased to be joined this afternoon, have 9 children. The watchwords of Christendom College are, truth exists, the incarnation happened. As we live out the truth of the gospel, may we all find ways to make each day a fullness of time under the providence of God and to incarnate the Word in our own lives. Will you please join me in welcoming Dr. Timothy O'Donnell.
Well, that was a very beautiful introduction. Thank you so much, O'Donnell. Appreciate it very much. Let's see if I can lift the microphone up there. Can you hear me in the back all right? That works. Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you. It is a great joy to be with you all. I had heard about this group before and be given the opportunity to speak to you. The Catholic Citizens of Illinois is a great honor. You have a great and distinguished history and tradition here of fidelity to our Lord and service to His church as well. So it's always a joy to be with good Catholics, especially here in Chicago. Pope Benedict XVI once wrote, and I quote, "The history of salvation is not a small event on a poor planet in the immensity of the universe. It is not a minimal thing which happens by chance on a lost planet. It is the motive for everything, the motive for creation. Everything is created so that this story can exist. The encounter between God and His creatures," end quote. Love Pope Benedict. All right. But no event in the history of our world can compare, has had such a profound impact as the coming of Christianity. There were many persons before Jesus who claimed to speak for God, many after Jesus who also claimed to speak for God, but none of them have been so precisely predicted, so anxiously awaited, and universally expected. One of the reasons why Christianity was able in such a short time to replace so many different religions back at that particular time had to do with the situation of the world at that time. Not only were there Jewish prophecies more than 1,000 years old that gave specific details about the life, death, the birth, where it would take place, that had been in existence for over a millennium. But in addition to this, there was also a lot of prophecy about a Messiah who would come, who would suffer, who would die, who would redeem. But even among the pagan Romans, their historian Tacitus, and also Josephus, the Jewish Roman historian, both of them wrote that at that time, when they were writing, there was a great expectation that a ruler of the entire world was going to come out of Judea. Imagine that. Judea, little backwatered place at that particular time. But there were other things that stirred the Romans to thinking something was going to happen, particularly during the reign of Augustus Caesar. Virgil, the great poet, was writing his Eclogues. And in his fourth Eclogue, suddenly something just bursts on the page that doesn't seem to fit with anything else that he wrote. And he writes, "The last age begins anew. The Virgin returns from the heights of heaven, and a new generation descends. A child is born, and the race of iron ceases, and a race of gold shall rise up over the world. He shall receive divine life. He shall reign with this divine life and shall rule the world that has been given peace. He will be the child of peace, and the serpent will die." Isn't that interesting? Historians should spend some time on that. Well, one of the great traditions that's been preserved down to us was evidently, the tradition was that Augustus Caesar himself had a vision of this woman, this virgin in the sky with this divine child that was going to usher in this new time. And he actually built an altar to commemorate that vision. And if you have the chance to go to Rome, and you go up on the Capitoline Hill, there's a beautiful church in the hands of the Franciscans now called the Ara Coeli, the altar of heaven. And in that church, you will see the altar, the tradition says was built by Augustus, and they even found in one of the columns right next to that altar in the church, the actual name of Augustus Caesar, that it must have been a column that actually stood in his house at that time. Isn't that interesting? So that beautiful, beautiful tradition of a vision that Augustus saw, referring to Virgil's fourth Eclogue. But there's other things that you can see in Rome. Right around the year 13 BC, if you go over to the district called Trastevere, that was the Jewish quarter in ancient pagan times. And right around that year, 16 BC, there was a sudden eruption of oil. All this oil bubbled to the surface, and so much that it flowed all the way down into the Tiber River. And of course, for the Jews, when you see oil flowing, oil is always a sign of chrism, gave them the sense, oh, the Messiah is coming. This is a sign that he is coming. And of course, looking back, they could see, this was a sign of the one who was expected to actually come and change the world. And if you go to the church of Santa Maria in Trastevere to this day, that exact spot is still located right under the communion rail in that beautiful church. It's the oldest church dedicated to the Blessed Mother in Rome, Santa Maria in Trastevere. They have a plaque right there saying Fons Oleo, and you can look down. This is the spot where that oil sort of erupted, foretelling and pointing to the arrival of the Messiah way back in 16 BC. But there were other strange things that began to happen. Pagan oracles that used to try to predict things that were going to happen in the future. One by one, they stopped giving oracles. They all started to cease. So much so that Plutarch, the great historian, Plutarch's Lives, everyone reads that who's classically educated, actually wrote an essay on the passing of the oracles, where he's trying to think, why is it that all the oracles were stopping at Dodona, at Delphi? And of course, eventually, he comes up to this experience that this sailor had, where there was a proclamation that the great Pan is dead. And the fathers of the church reading that and saying, it's no wonder the oracles were all ceasing and dying, is because the pagan age was ending and Christ had arrived. And so if you look for these things, you can see all sorts of signs that point us in this particular direction. Even among the Greeks, their greatest philosophers were talking about a divine logos, that somehow there was going to be some type of divine breakthrough and some type of revelation that the gods were going to send that would assist mankind at that time. Even in China, thousands of miles away, the annals of the Celestial Empire, there's a report of the emperor asking, what is that strange light in the sky? And it's right about our time at the beginning of the Christian era. And the Chinese sages went to the emperor and they said, well, there's a story that that light indicates the great saint of the West, whose religion one day was to come to China. Isn't that interesting? All right. Well, other things that we can find out. Many people today, of course, try to reduce Christianity to the social gospel. You know, Jesus was just a peace and justice guy. Look, we're all for peace and we're all for justice. But you cannot reduce Christianity just to peace and justice. If that was the case, there was already a Chinese philosopher 4 centuries before the coming of Jesus Christ, named Mo Ti. And Mo Ti taught the greatest truth was the universal love of all mankind. He was an inspired guy, he had a number of followers. But, you know, after 100 years, nobody remembers Mo Ti. Have you ever heard of Mo Ti before? That's what I thought. Okay, thank you. If you had, I'd be disturbed. Okay. But anyway, why is that the case? Well, Mo Ti was just a man. He could teach profound things, but he couldn't enable people to live up to those things. The uniqueness of Jesus was not that he was just a teacher. He certainly was a teacher. Or a philosopher. He was a philosopher for sure as well. Nor was he just a prophet. But he was God. He was the creator of the universe, the one who made heaven and earth. And he came not primarily to teach, but primarily to redeem all mankind through his suffering and through his death on the cross, reconciling an estranged humanity with an all-good God. So the essence of Christianity lies in 3 great truths. The first one is the incarnation. God becoming man. I almost hate saying it because it almost trivializes it just to say it. We look at a crash and try to imagine what was that like. But imagine the Creator to blessed are you when men speak all sorts of evil against you because of my sake. Rejoice and be glad. We get so used to this we don't realize this is a revolution. This is startling. No man has ever spoken like this. That's why when they sent the temple guards out to arrest Jesus, they come back to the Sanhedrin, they say, why didn't you arrest him? They said, because no man has ever spoken like this man has spoken before. They went on to arrest him, and his words arrested them. It's kind of beautiful to see, isn't it? But the church appeared in the world with our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Galatians, St. Paul's beautiful letter in chapter 4, we read as follows. When the fullness of time was come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, that he might redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption as sons. Isn't that beautiful? Fullness of time, he said, born of a woman, under the law, that we might get that life of grace. Now that fullness of time, God promised a Redeemer immediately after the fall of our first parents. You all remember that back in Genesis 3, right? Genesis 3:16. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. The only time in Scripture where there's a reference to the feminine seed. Every other time it's the male seed. But there's a reference to the feminine seed because that's going to be a virginal conception. Right? So the promise that there would be a Redeemer, someone who was going to come and was going to crush the head of the serpent. Then God chooses a specific individual, a man named Abraham, and makes a special covenant with him. And he tells Abraham, in you, Abraham, shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And then he manifests his presence throughout that sacred history with the Hebrew people. When they leave Egypt at the time of Exodus, when Moses goes up on Mount Sinai and receives the Decalogue. And then to keep that faith and hope alive, he sends these divinely inspired men who try to keep the people faithful. They're always slipping back into idolatry and polytheism. But you get that thunderous message, thus says the Lord God. And then you get that whirlwind of a message that tries to keep the people faithful to the teaching of the covenant, the teaching. So divine providence then chooses that moment in time and in history when mankind had really been prepared for the coming of Christ. Now, of course, his coming was delayed for a long time. Why so long a delay? Well, you look back and wonder, why would that be the case? It's probably because mankind had to learn the misery of sin. And when we're really left on our own, how wretched we really are. We're a mess. Chesterton used to say original sin is the one dogma that doesn't have to be proven. Look at us. We're a mess. We lie, we cheat, we steal, we do all these horrible things. Now just imagine for a moment that you had lied, you had blasphemed against God, you had maligned someone's character horribly. You drank too much and hit somebody in your car and killed them. And just imagine you did something horrible like that, and there was no such thing as the sacrament of confession. You know, when we go into confession, Jesus has given us many things. He's given us the Eucharist, but that sacrament of reconciliation, you know, where your sins can be forgiven. When the priest raises that hand in the confessional, the blood of Christ is pouring from that hand, and it's coming all over you, all over your soul. And even if the sin was scarlet, it's made white as wool. What a great gift. Imagine a world where there's no sacrament of confession, where you're locked in sin and there's no way you can get out of it. That is the state of the world before the coming of Jesus Christ. Thank God for Jesus. Thank God for the Catholic Church. Thank God for our faith, for our sacraments. None of that would have been possible without his coming. Can you handle a little more history? 322 BC, Alexander the Great conquers Judea. All right? So all of a sudden there's sort of a Greek culture that comes into Judea. After he dies, that kingdom of Judea will be handed over to the Hellenistic kings of Syria. And eventually there'll be one of those kings named Antiochus Epiphanes who's going to try to say everyone in his kingdom have to worship the Greek gods, including those Jews who are living in Judea. And he tries to force them into a national apostasy. And then the Maccabees rise up in the book of Maccabees and fight against the Syrian kings. And they achieve Jewish independence in the year 142 BC. So about 140 years before the coming of Christ, it's an independent kingdom. Many of the Jews began to think the Messiah, when he comes, he's going to be one of the Maccabean kings. And they're excited. But civil war, strife, eventually disillusion many of the rabbis in Judea at that time. So many begin to speculate that when the Messiah comes, he's not really going to be a temporal king, but rather he'll be a spiritual teacher of divine origin. Spiritual teacher of divine origin. As a matter of fact, if you read the Jewish Targums, these are rabbinical commentaries on the prophets that would have been very popular around the 1st century BC and AD. Blessed Mother would have heard these in her synagogue. Joseph would have heard these. There were a number of passages that were very difficult for the rabbis to deal with. Those of you who still remember Handel's Messiah, and he shall be called, the great prophet Isaiah, Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, he'll be called Yahweh, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. What does that mean? And they struggled. They didn't know about the Trinity, but it indicated that whoever the Messiah was going to be, somehow there's some incredible, unique relationship to Yahweh that defies our understanding. That makes sense? And then, of course, you have the one like a son of man appearing before the one sitting on the ancient throne who receives everlasting dominion and power and glory. And the prophet Daniel, they recognize that's the Messiah who's to come. What will this Messiah be like? All right. Well, eventually what's going to happen, the Romans come on the scene. And in 63 BC, Roman legions under the great Pompey march, and they conquer Judea. 12,000 Jews try to block Pompey from coming into the sacred precincts of the temple. He slays them all. He walks into the temple. pulls back the great curtain, and Pompey enters into the Holy of Holies, which probably contained nothing. It was a perfect cube. The ark was long time gone. We don't know what he thought, but when he came out, he said, I want sacrifices to be resumed. He appoints a new high priest, and sacrifices continue in the temple. Rome allowed the Jewish kings to continue to govern under Roman authority. All right. Then eventually, with the death of Herod, which probably was somewhere between 4 and 1 BC, we're not absolutely sure about the date, you get a Roman procurator. And the Roman procurator governed Judea and allowed the Jews a great deal of freedom, except in real important issues like capital punishment. If you wanted to kill somebody, you needed the approval of the procurator. The fact that the Jews had ceased to be an independent nation and were part of the vast Roman Empire is of tremendous importance for the rise of the gospel and the spread of the Christian message. The reign of Caesar Augustus, he was Caesar for 41 years. The amazing thing, a blessing with the Middle Ages never forgot, throughout that 41-year period, the entire Roman world, the entire Mediterranean region was at peace. Cities were flourishing. Trade was flourishing. You had 27 Roman legions guarding the borders of the empire, and everywhere there was peace. It was called in history the Pax Romana, the great Roman peace. That peace was so incredible that even the Roman Senate said, we have to do something to honor this. And they built an enormous sort of sacrificial temple called the Ara Pacis, the Altar of Peace. It was built around 13 BC to commemorate the fact that the whole world was at peace during the reign of Augustus Caesar. And I'm happy to let you know that altar has been found and has been placed together. It's just on the right side of the Tiber, just slightly north of St. Peter's Basilica. They charge money now, but you can go in and you can actually see an altar dedicated to the fact that when Jesus came, the entire world was in a state of peace. When Rome went to war, they opened the Temple of Janus in the Roman Forum. They took out this great spear, put it out there, indicating that, the state was at war. That spear was put in the Temple of Janus, and the doors of Janus were closed throughout the reign of Augustus Caesar. The whole world was at peace. Now, somewhere right at that time, Jesus of Nazareth was born. We believe is probably more likely 2 BC. Astronomers tell us that there was incredible phenomena taking place in the heavens from 7 to 2 BC. Not only Halley's Comet coming, but incredible configurations of planets. Now, the Bethlehem star might have actually been a miraculous light, but some of the astronomers looking at it say that there was an amazing configuration between Jupiter and Venus. You've all seen Venus, how bright that can be in the night sky. Imagine with no artificial light. And Jupiter, the star of kingship, all right, meaning righteousness in Hebrew, was so configured with Venus at that time that it was right on the horizon, that if you were coming from the east, you would see that star in the west. And it would have moved slowly to the north. And it's very interesting that it was stationary on one date, where it would form a retro loop, but it would then start moving back south. But it would be stationary for one day. That day was December 25th, and it would have appeared to have been directly over Bethlehem. Now, I'm not saying that's the star, but astronomers, even at JPL and Pasadena, have commented about that's really incredible. So somewhere around that time, Jesus was born. Now, one of the things that I do want to hit upon, I do have 40 minutes. How am I doing on time? You tell me.
You still have about 20 minutes.
Oh, thank you, Jesus. All right. That I'm going to share with you. I taught world religions for a number of years. And one of the most beautiful accounts of a birth that you will find in world religions is taken from the Lita Vishtra, which talks about the birth of Buddha. And would you mind if I shared an account of that with you just briefly? I mean, it's a beautiful account, but just want to share a little bit of this with you. Reads as follows. Then Maya Devi, surrounded by 80,000 chariots drawn by horses, 84,000 chariots hitched to elephants adorned with ornaments of every kind, protected by an army of 84,000 soldiers, heroic, courageous, handsome, well-built, with shield and cuirass, preceded by 60,000 women of Kakya, protected by 40,000 members of the household of Kudunana. Eventually, the queen who's going to have the child comes out of the house surrounded by all of these people. It continues on. Then Maya Devi, entering the garden of Lumbini,
and leaving her magnificent chariot surrounded by the daughters of men and gods, went from one tree to the other, one wood to the other. She finally comes to this beautiful plachka tree that is covered with gems and all sort of absolutely beautiful ornaments, etc. And then she gets ready to have birth. Suddenly, this tree, through the power of Bodhisattva, bent down in salutation, then Maya Devi, stretching out her right arm like a lightning bolt that furrows its way across the sky. Then taking a branch of the tree as a sign of blessing, and looking to the distant horizon of the sky, and yawning, remained motionless. At that moment, 60,000 Esparsa, drawing close to her, formed an honorary escort. Accompanied by like supernatural power, Bodhisattva entered into his mother's womb. At the end of 10 full months, he issued from his mother's side, endowed with memory and knowledge, without ever having been touched by the impurity of his mother's womb. That's the account of the birth of Buddha. And it's beautiful. But just for the purpose of contrast, I'd like to read from a Gentile historian who wrote a gospel. And this is what he said when it came to the birth of Jesus. In those days, a decree went forth from Caesar Augustus that the world should be enrolled in a census. This was when the first census was done, when Quirinius was governor in Syria. And all went to be enrolled, each to his own city. Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be enrolled with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to be delivered. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Can you see the contrast? One is absolutely beautiful, but one is a myth. One is a myth. It's a fabricated story. The other is deeply grounded in history. All four of our Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I speak as more of a historian now than a theologian, are incredible documents, worthy of belief, very, very credible, written within the lifetime of countless numbers of witnesses. And you can see the contrast between the birth of Jesus, that was dramatic, the birth of Jesus and the birth of Buddha. Now, who is Jesus? Jesus, as the church teaches us, is the second person of the Trinity who comes into the world, becomes man, born of the Virgin Mary, in order to do what? In order to save our world from sin. Mankind lost the friendship of God, and we could do nothing to really regain that friendship any more than a dead man can bring himself back to life once again. Now, maybe God could have given us maybe a new natural happiness without the incarnation. Maybe he could have forgiven sin without reparation. But that would not have been in keeping with his perfect justice and his deep and profound desire to manifest what? Perfect love. That's what he really wanted to manifest. And so he takes the most sublime course possible. His only son will become a man, representing all of humanity in that incarnation to redeem us with his life, passion, and death. Because perfect redemption, perfect satisfaction, perfect expiation could only be done by someone who was at one time fully man and at the same time fully and completely God. And that's why we speak of Christ as our mediator. So along with the infallible church, we profess that in Jesus we have someone who is fully and completely human. He is a man like us in every single way except his sin, right? But remember, the fact that he didn't sin makes him more human. Every time we sin, we debase our humanity. We're less human. It's when we do something that is good, something that is virtuous, that we become fully alive. That's when we're fully ourselves. Who's more fully themselves than Mother Teresa of Calcutta, or Blessed Giorgio Frassati, or John Paul II? But people for others. That's where you see the great beauty of Jesus. That's why he was totally the man for others, because he was totally human, fully alive. And at the same time, he is also divine. Now, all of us are creatures of desire, right? We all have restless hearts. We all have longings. But Jesus, when he comes, opens a channel of grace that is going to change history in the most deep and in the most profound way. Because when he actually becomes man, he's showing how much he really wants to love each and every one of us, individually, personally. Pius XII said that in his passion, Jesus, because he had the irradiation of the beatific vision, thought of each and every one of us individually as a mother contemplates her babe playing on her lap. I've seen what a mother is like with a babe on her lap, and that's the mother's entire world, is that child, is that infant. That's the type of attention that our Lord had during his passion, thought of each and every one of us. And that's why the proper response, if we think about really what's going on in history, in time, really and truly happening, we are called to a response of gratitude and generosity. Because everything that we know about love tells us that love desires one thing: to be united with the object of its love, right? Isn't that true? When boy meets girl or girl meets boy, and it's that goofy kind of falling in love kind of thing, they're texting all the time. They're on the phone all the time. You say, what are you talking about? I don't know. They don't know. But they really don't know. And they don't really care, because all they really want to do is they want to be together, right? That's why when it comes to love and manifestation of love at particular times of year, you've got to get everybody together, right? What's Thanksgiving all about? You come together to share a great meal, and you want everybody to be together at Thanksgiving. Christmas. Why is Christmas so important? Why is every Hallmark movie so popular? You know, you got to get back home. You got to overcome some obstacle. Then you kiss and it snows. It's the same plot. Every one of those movies. But the fact of the matter is, you need to get everybody together. And if someone's missing, it's just not the same. Love always desires union. If you love Guinness, you're going to drink the Guinness, right? If you like steak, you're going to have a steak. If you like fish on Friday, and I do like fish anytime, you have fish. And you seek union with that. But we also know that here in our fallen world, that the language of love in our fallen world always involves suffering. Real love always involves a willingness to sacrifice for the sake of the beloved in this world. And that's one of the reasons why Jesus chooses to become man. And the union between Jesus and God is so intimate that we call it one hypostasis. Man and God are united, that there's only one divine person. That's how much of a union he wanted to have. And he assumes a mortal nature so that he can suffer, so that he can really convince us, I really do love you. And this is something that tormented the great Augustine, dealing with the problem of evil and suffering in the world. And he writes in his Confessions, I sought whence evil came, and there was no solution until I found the answer in our faith. Our faith. Because the world will ask us, young people will ask us, the world will always ask us, does God really care about pain? Does God really care about human suffering? Did he smell the smokestacks at Auschwitz and at Dachau and smell the burning of that flesh and just remain indifferent? Does he really care? Does he have a heart? Does he really know what it's like to have brain tumors with cancer, agonizing migraines, so much you just can't bear the pain in your head? Does he really know that? Does he know what it's like to endure drought where there's no water? And you have a type of thirst, a thirst that could drive a man insane. Droughts like they still have this day in Africa. Does he know what it's like to go without food, to really know the pain of hunger, to have nothing to put in your stomach, to go for a week without having any food, or 20 days without having any food, or a month without any food? Does he know what it's like to lose a loved one, to lose a parent, to have a father die, or a friend, or someone you really love, with that heart-wrenching agony and grief that you can't really put in words? You just sort of sigh, or you're alone because it just hurts too much because you've lost half your soul with that death. Does he know what it's like to be innocent and to be cruelly tortured for conscience sake? Does he know what it's like to lose your freedom, to be imprisoned, thrown into a dungeon, to be tortured? Does he know what it's like to have physical pain so sharp and intense that it kind of knock your desire even to live, knock your heart out? Does he know what it's like to be abandoned by one's friends? To be betrayed by someone you love, someone you consider to be a friend, even at the point when you're dying for them? Our faith tells us, yeah, he knows each and every one of those things. So what are we supposed to do as we approach Christmas and when this great time of Advent, this great time of expectation, when we think about the historic reality of the incarnation, real people, real events, God truly did become man and enter time and changed everything, changed history, changed time in the most dramatic way. What are we supposed to do? He tells us, love one another as I have loved you. And has he loved us? Has he proven his love for us? Absolutely. We need to imitate that love. I once heard a story told by the late Fulton Sheen. My dad heard him speak a couple of times and had a chance to talk to him. It's a powerful story I'd like to share and kind of wrap up with this. There was a young girl who lived in a neighborhood, a rural neighborhood. You know, some of those rural neighborhoods have houses far away from the street. Like a big hedge, you have to walk a long way to get to the house. It makes it tough for trick-or-treaters. You want to get as many baby Ruths as quickly as possible. Okay. So anyway, this girl goes out on her first date. She's only 16 years old. Gets dropped off after the date. The day drives away. She starts walking to her house. There's a man lurking in the hedges. Jumps out, brutally rapes this girl. On the first date, she's only 16 years old. 4 weeks later, she found very, it doesn't happen often, found out she is pregnant. She's expecting a child. No one will believe the story except the mother. The mother believes it at her school. Nobody believes her. She's singing the choir, the children's choir. No one believes. Comments are made, oh, having a girl like that. She wrote a letter to Archbishop Sheen, basically saying, what can I do? I simply cannot bear this pain and this shame. And the good Archbishop wrote her back. He said to her, all this suffering you have been taking upon yourself because of the sin of one man. Suppose you were to take on the sins of 20 men, or 30, took on the sins of 100 men. Perhaps you might begin to have a bloody sweat. And that young girl understood, and she wrote back to Bishop Sheen, I will pray for that man who did this thing to me every day for the rest of my life. Now, I would submit to you that is not a natural response. That humanly speaking, that type of response is impossible. But with faith in Christ, all things are possible. And the love of Christ which triumphed in that young girl can also triumph in us as well if we let it. And the reason we can do those sort of wonderful things is because there is a torrent of grace that has been unleashed in time through the Catholic Church. We have no right to be Catholic. It is an incredible gift that we've been given with faith. We can be given that type of understanding. We know that our lives do have meaning and have purpose because of that baby that was born in that manger so many years ago. But Christ is not just in heaven or descended at the right hand of the Father. He's also on earth. He's what? He's the head of the mystical body. He's with us right now. All you need is two gathering in his name, and he is in their midst. He's with us right now. He's also in the Holy Eucharist, the living center of each and every one of our churches. But that grace goes on in history. And that's the beauty. If you look at the history of our church, why are there hospitals? Why are there orphanages? Why are there schools? Why are there colleges? Why are there universities? It's because of the Catholic Church and the reality of our faith. This is a time to love the church even more. There's plenty of people criticizing it. We too can oftentimes criticize it so much. Who'd want to come in? But there's nothing else. It is the unique source of salvation. And if we look at history, look at that channel of grace in Peter, in Paul, in Augustine, in Bonaventure, in Thomas Aquinas, and you keep going on, in St. Margaret Mary Alacoque, in St. Claude Colombière, all right, you go on, in St. John Bosco, in St. John Paul II, in Maximilian Kolbe. In every single time there's a torrent of grace where people have responded to that grace and live an incredible life and make history in the most profound, dramatic way. The Christ of Catholicism is not just the memory of a great historical person who lived at one time. He is, in his own words, he is the Alpha from which everything originates, and he is also the Omega to which every single thing in life is directed. He's the center of time. He is the center of history. And that's what we are celebrating at this time of Advent and this time of Christmas. History does not move in meaningless cycles. It is a linear progression. It begins with creation. The central event is the incarnation, redemption, and we're moving to the consummation of time with the final second coming of the Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, who said, "See, I make all things